years, and I am highly impressed with the work he has done, and you're going to hear some of it right now. I'm going to go through his resume very quickly. I also want to thank Mrs. Ornet Hines and Dr. Shengquan Duan and Mr. Sampson for participating in this important panel discussion. Sunil and I began discussing this event back in January, after the riot at the Capitol, witnessing the aggression and discrimination towards Asian Americans as we navigated the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the Black Lives Matter movement, heightened by George Floyd's murder and our former president's remarks and discrimination towards immigrants in America perpetuated the need to formalize an event addressing racism in our community. This is a big task, and it's obviously not going to be resolved immediately, but it definitely needs working on. The discussions that we need to be having with each other, ourselves, our colleagues and friends, they are not easy. Progress towards a more just and equitable world will only happen with continued and consistent open conversation and learning from and about one another and learning about ourselves. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Sunil Bata, our facilitator for the evening. Sunil Bata is an internationally known professor in psychology and human development. His book publications include American Karma, Race, Culture, and Identity in the Indian Diaspora, and Decolonizing Psychology, Globalization, Social Justice, and Indian Youth Identities, which received the 2018 William James Book Award from the American Psychological Association. The book was given a runner-up honorable mention in the 2018 Outstanding Book Award by the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry. His research focused on understanding the development of self and identity within the context of racism, neoliberal globalization, and migration. His current scholarly project on decolonizing psychology attempts to provide a conceptual framework to reimagine the discipline of psychology within the context of global capitalism. Decolonizing Psychology asks how Euro-American scientific psychology becomes the standard bearer of psychology around the world, and thereby determines whose stories get told, what knowledge is considered as legitimate, and whose lives are considered central to the future of psychology. Dr. Bata is a fellow of Division 24 of the American Psychiatric Association and serves on the editorial board of several journals. He has published over 50 articles and book chapters and has received Connecticut College's 2018 Nancy Batson Nisbet Rash Faculty Research Award, the 2005 John King Excellence in Teaching Award, and the American Psychological Association's 2015 International Humanitarian Award, and the 2017 Theodore Serban Award for Distinguished Contributions to Psychology. In 2009, he received the Martin Luther King Faculty Service Award given to a faculty who upholds the legacy of Dr. King's work with their demonstrated commitment to social justice and serving underrepresented communities, either on campus or in the city of New London. Please join me in welcoming Sunil and thanking him for taking a lead. As you can just surmise from his resume, he isn't exactly sitting around waiting for something to do. So Sunil, thank you so much for taking the time to help us put this important program together. So why do we go from there? We'll turn it over to Sunil.
All right, Tony, thank you for that wonderful introduction. All I could say is that I've been at Connecticut College for over 20 years now, and it was Peggy Sheridan who was my mentor, who was Tony's spouse and wife. And when I started out at Connecticut College, our relationship was not just professional. They were also very much like a family to me initially, especially when I was coming new to the college. So our relationship goes back almost 2 decades, and one common factor that we share is our conversations about our homeland, the homeland we left behind, and what were the differences between, Tony's nostalgia about Ireland and mine about India, and those were became our crossroads to talk about at different points. And so when the January 6th insurrection happened at the Capitol, Tony and I gathered to think about what could be done in the community to bring together voices that would center the migration experience or the immigrants' experience. We had a similar event at Pfizer a few months ago, which was organized by one of our panelists, Dr. Shen, and Dr. Kuruganti, who's here as one of the participants, and others. And that was focused on Asian American, the racism against Asian Americans that was brewing. So there was a kind of confluence of events. We were thinking about the post-George Floyd movement, the protests in the streets regarding racism, questions about mass incarceration, alienation that immigrants were feeling, undocumented migrants on the border. So there were all of these events coming together. And if you look at the statistics right now, we have 45 million citizens, 45 million people in America who are considered to be immigrants. And if you add another 40 million of their children, we have close to 80 million families who have some kind of immigration status as first generation or second generation. And that amounts to close to 23% of our population. So if nothing else, the demographics sort of demand some kind of clarity and conversation about what it means to be an immigrant in America at this point. So that's the kind of context framing. I won't take much more time about what the title means and what the perfect union, but the perfect union, just to say a few words, was inspired. Of course, it's a preamble in our constitution, but also it was inspired by Obama's speech in 2008, where he talks about, I'll just read just a few excerpts from it, where he says that we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, 221 years ago, in a hall that still stands across the street, a group of men gathered with these simple words, launched America's improbable experiment in democracy. Farmers and scholars, statesmen and patriots who traveled across an ocean to escape tyranny and persecution finally made real their Declaration of Independence at a Philadelphia convention that lasted through the spring of 1787. The document they produced was eventually signed, but ultimately unfinished. It was stained by the nation's original sin of slavery, a question that divided the colonies and brought the convention to a stalemate until the founders chose to allow the slave trade to continue for at least 20 more years and to leave any final resolution to future generations. And then, of course, he goes on to speak about what would be needed here were Americans in successive generations who were willing to do their part to protest and struggles on the streets and the courts through a civil war and civil disobedience, and always at great risk to narrow that gap between the promise of our ideals and the reality of our time. This is what we have assembled to do here even today, is to think about what our ideals are and what is the reality that we're living in. And that's sort of the title of the perfect union. So I have sets of questions based on our conversation that we had with participants. And now I'm going to ask questions, and each participant will have 2 or 3 minutes to answer these questions. And then we will open it up for discussion. But before that, I'm missing something, a few minutes for each of the participants to introduce themselves. So let me invite, first let me invite Ornet. Hines.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the Chamber and Dr. Sunil for giving me this opportunity to be a part. My name is Ornet Hines. I am from Jamaica. Yes, born and raised. I migrated to the United States September 3rd, 2002. I wasn't always in Connecticut. I actually started out in Rhode Island, where I went to school at Johnson & Wales. So I migrated so I could get I'm not going to say a better education, maybe a well-rounded education. And I studied hospitality management at Johnstown, Wales. After graduating, I actually got a job at Foxwoods, and maybe about 16 months into that, realizing that maybe that's not the ideal schedule for me. Also, the environment was a smoking one, and it just wasn't one that I could work in. So I transferred my skills and I went into banking. I started at Bank of America in 2005. I worked my way up from banker to branch manager in about 5 years. I then went to Dime Bank and I worked for about 4 years there until now I'm at Liberty Bank, where I am branch manager, assistant vice president for the Norwich office. So that's like a highlight of my migration to the US and where I am now. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ornet. Dr. Duan?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank Tony, Sunil, and Stacy for the invitation. So I get this opportunity to exchange ideas with the two other fantastic panelists, Ornet and Liam, and on a very important topic, American identity and immigration. Hello, everyone. My name is Shengquan Duan, and I'm currently a pharmaceutical science team leader at Pfizer. I came to the United States from China 23 years ago. So actually, on July 4th, 1998, I arrived in St. Louis to pursue my PhD degree. And then in 2003, I took my first job in upstate Albany, New York, and my status changing from non-resident alien to resident alien. And then 2005, I became a permanent resident. And in 2010, at the time I moved to Connecticut and also become American citizen. So I just want to finally use this opportunity, use your platform to give a big shout out to my fellow Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So you may know, May is the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So please share your story, celebrate your culture, and celebrate your accomplishment with your neighbors, with your colleagues. You should be proud of yourself because you have made a great contribution to the achievement of the United States. So thank you.
Right. Liam Sampson. Thank you, Dr. Duan.
Thanks, Sunil, for inviting me to this today. So growing up, I was born in South Africa, and I moved to this country. I moved to America when I was in 1997, when I just turned 2. So being from South Africa, I kind of had the advantage of kind of blending in with, Black culture. And as I grew up, I kind of indoctrinated into my own personality. Like I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, so it was majority white race over there. So I kind of struggled with identity growing up. I tried to assimilate into the Black side of things, and it was kind of weird because they didn't really see me as I guess one of them was for rather. But I went to school at IIT in Chicago, and I made my way to Connecticut by taking a job at Electric Boat as a structural engineer. So, getting out of that, just trying to identify myself as a person. And speaking of this topic today, there's a lot of like identity struggles that immigrants go through, with their home country versus with the Americans here. But it's a challenge, and it's kind of built me up as a person. So it's definitely like, that challenge, that obstacle that you go through kind of, makes you stronger.
Okay, thank you, Liam. Now we you got a little snapshot of each of the immigrant biographies. Now I have about 5 or 6 questions to ask, and each of the panelists will provide a response and answer for about 2 or 3 minutes. So we'll follow the same order for consistency's sake. So I will start with Ornet again, the question that goes to her and to the other panelists, if you want to reflect on it in the meanwhile. What does being an immigrant in America mean to you in this current moment?
Well, so since I migrated, a lot has changed, but a lot has also stayed the same. Right now, with everything that's going on, as Liam mentioned, sometimes you have an identity issue. You're asked the question, where are you from? And you're not really sure how to answer that. I guess it depends on who is asking. But for me, being an immigrant here is just to be able to set an example for what the immigrant community stands for, knowing that we're hardworking people, knowing that we care about this country just as, and that's the thing, when you migrate here and you live, grow up, or having time, spend time here, becoming a citizen, you have to make a choice. You really have to choose that you're willing to abandon all your stuff of your home country and be there for the United States. And I think we do that. Most of us do that, working hard, paying our taxes, contributing to the financial and the cultural makeup of this country. I feel those two things have value. And so for me as an immigrant in this country, I see myself as an American that follow the rules of the country and try to do my best to make it a better place to be. So that's my take on it right now.
Okay, thank you. Shen, do you want to take the?
Yeah, first I want to put this at first. I am a proud immigrant to call America my home. So I have been pursuing my American dream one step at a time. I work very hard to get here. I have made great contributions through my research at work and my volunteer work in the community, and also bring the cultural diversity to the melting pot. I want to say that first, but then in recent years, I think I start feeling some uneasiness. The anti-immigrant group and activists are utilizing social media to demonize immigrants and get their message to public. And their ideologies have been brought into the mainstream media. And the rhetoric have been adopted by the policymakers. The people in power have started implementing some harsh anti-immigrant laws nationwide. Of course, the recent anti-Asian hate crimes makes the experience even worse. That we're probably going to talk a little bit more next. But overall, I still feel my immigrant experience is rewarding. So over the 23 years, I have received tremendous support from many generous friends and strangers. And the opportunities I'm able to find through my hard work and supportive communities are incredible. I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Liam?
So both my parents grew up in the apartheid era of South Africa. So coming to America, it was almost like an escape from those years of kind of pulling anybody with different skin tone down. So we've definitely built up a life here in America, and I'm very proud to call myself an American citizen. But like you mentioned, the rhetoric that comes with anti-immigrants, this notion that, oh, they're outsiders, especially like, when you're looking at everyday tweets and, politicians very high up there are talking about American representatives going back to their country because they don't belong here. And just seeing that, it hurts. And it's a challenge that I faced in particular, especially since I'm National Guard for Connecticut as well, an officer and a second lieutenant in there, and I'm like, sometimes I'm shy. I don't explicitly admit that I was born in South Africa to try to avoid that prejudice against anti-immigrants or anti-immigrant notions. So it's definitely made me stronger. The resistance of just dislike and that sort of stuff, and trying to establish my own identity here as an American citizen.
Thank you. Ornet or Shen, did you want to respond to each other or add a thought or a comment?
I just wanted to add, just like what everyone said, that being part of this country, we feel that we have value to what we bring to the country. And earlier you mentioned about, just gave some statistic on immigrants in the US. And for this particular topic, I'd like to just point out some facts for our state that we're in right now on the immigrant population in Connecticut. So this data is as of 2018. So I'm sorry that there wasn't any more recent data, but the American Immigration Council, there's inside Connecticut, we have over 500,000 immigrants living in Connecticut. That's over 15% of the population. The top countries for immigrants in Connecticut are India, Jamaica, which represent 9% and 7% respectively. And then in the 5% field is the Dominican Republic, Poland, and Ecuador. More than 1/3 of the adult immigrants in Connecticut has a college degree or higher education as of 2018. And I want to add to what immigrants contribute to the economy, because earlier I mentioned that I feel that my financial and cultural aspect does have value in this country, and I refuse to believe otherwise, rhetoric or not. I know what immigrants contribute to this country and why we belong here. In 2018, immigrants in Connecticut paid $4.8 billion, $4.8 billion in federal taxes, 2.6 in state and local taxes. We contribute $16.1 billion in spending power in just Connecticut alone, in just the state alone. So being an immigrant in this country, I just refuse to feel like I'm not valued or feel like I did not play my part in making this country what it is today and continuing to doing so. So there's facts out there that the immigrant community really does contribute. And just for this state alone, those are really big numbers.
Thank you for sharing that crucial information. Liam or Shen, just take a few seconds.
Yeah, the data Ornet shared is amazing, and I echo with her. And I know the road is always bumpy, but I am willing to work very hard with everybody in the society to make sure this country is still the greatest country in the world, and it's the greatest country for the immigrants as well.
All right. Liam, just want to take an opportunity to invite you if you want to say a few words, or else I can move forward.
I would say that to Ornet's point, yes, immigrants we do contribute a lot, and it's kind of weird being, you know, African American in the U.S. because African American itself is just such a broad term. You know, I mean, like, look at Elon Musk. Is he not from Africa, or just as a perspective? Like, would you not refer to him as African American? And it's like, you know, it's immigrants, and it allows you to kind of connect with just the whole array of like different people and different backgrounds as well. That's all I'll leave it at.
Okay. I think the only thing I would add to the discussion, trying not to bring in my thoughts as a facilitator, but I think it's important to also clarify what do we mean by, what is the definition of a human being? Does a human being only have worth if they contribute in taxes? Is this how we define or measure our worth? So what happens to those human beings who are disadvantaged due to the fact they don't have privileges of education, who work on our farms, who landscape, who toil every day and contribute to the economy too, but at the same time are left behind? So what kind of a language do we understand those individuals who also make up our population? So their contributions come through dignity of labor, through education. You spoke about research. There are many other ways. So we also have to have a discussion about when we say human immigrants are citizens too, who become citizens, because I have a statistic here from the Immigrant Council too. Almost half, 47.2% of all immigrants have become United States citizens eventually. And so what happens to the citizen? Can you continue to be citizens in the real sense of the word, even though you've been an immigrant before? And what I hear them saying is that immigrants have this feeling that despite of contributing, what I hear Ornet say and Shen, that you feel like they're forever outsiders or forever foreigners. Like they're perpetually outsiders to a system that they want to belong to or contribute, but then they're at the same time excluded from. So just to kind of frame, like, what do we mean by saying when we say that, you know, we contribute or we make meaningful contributions? But going to the next question, can you identify moments or a specific time in your life when you felt that you belonged here? Can be any moment. And can you also speak about a moment or moments where you felt you don't belong here? Again, Ornet.
So let's talk about the moments where I feel I don't belong first. And I have to say, they don't come too often. And I'm not even sure that it's moments where I feel I don't belong as an immigrant in the United States. It's more of, so we're all humans, and we do have times when situations or an interaction or something makes you ask yourself, is it because I'm Black? And I don't ask myself this question a lot because I'm not a person who gets up every day and wonder, who do I identify as? Or, you know, what Black woman am I going to be today? Am I going to be the descendant from African and European descent? Am I going to be the person who is Jamaican? Am I going to, you know, the stereotypes that is expected of you as a Jamaican, loud, oh, you speak English? Those sort of things. But those are the times when I question myself, and they happen very rarely. I want to stress that. because it's not something that I try to dwell on. I don't try to put myself in a box. I'm an American, I'm a woman, and I go about my business every day as such. But occasionally, once in a while, there is a situation or an interaction that makes you ask yourself, am I being treated this way because I'm Black? Now, I want to talk about all the times, which definitely supersedes all the time I ask myself that question, where I do feel like I belong here. I came in this country. I went to school. I got an education. I've never owed on my taxes. I've always paid my bills. You followed the American path, so to speak. So I feel I belong here because I have something to contribute to this country. I have contributed to this country. I have contributed to our education system. I feel I belong here because, and this may be going off topic and I don't want to go stress too far, but even as an international student, plenty of you may not know that our tuition is much higher. It's 2 to 3 times higher than someone who lives in the state or lives in the country as a citizen. And I feel like I've paid my dues. And because I've paid my dues, I feel like I do belong here. And those are a lot more times than I consider that I don't belong here.
Right, thank you. Shen?
Yeah, the first time I felt I belong here is actually when I read the Pledge of Allegiance on the day of my citizenship ceremony. You know, one country under God, indivisible, for the liberty and justice for all. You know, that's first time I feel that's why I came here. And actually, every time when I travel abroad, you know, on a business trip, come back, when I get to the airport, the customs officer say, "Welcome home, sir." That's also the moment I feel I belong. Right. But most time I feel I belong here is at my work. Right. So I work with a group of great scientists, and we work together to tackle some life-threatening disease to develop life-saving drugs. And all the scientists have a greater diversity background. So that's the moment I feel I belong here. Definitely, I feel my value is maximized from my work. But off the work, when I see the news, the feeling is very different, right? The conspiracy theory, the discrimination against the marginalized people, the people of color, the anti-immigrant movement, you know, especially as a scientist, when I see the anti-intellectualism and anti-science gain momentum in the society, you know, those are the moments I feel, yeah, that's still the America I would dream about, you know. Yeah, that's my response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Liam?
I would say the first time I felt like I belong here is when I wasn't actually here. I was down in South Africa, and they started making fun of my accent. I just wasn't able to really connect, I guess, with that, South African culture the same way that my family did it back home. And I would say a lot of times when I don't feel like I belong here is when, and it's not just hatred against Black people, but also Asian Americans, and all types of other races, like when they get discriminated against, and when you open up the TV or open up the computer and you see somebody who looks like you getting shot, for no reason at all, no reason except because cops, they're just trigger happy sometimes. But it hurts, and sometimes you were just like, maybe here is not the best place to be for people who look like me.
Right. Yeah, I also want to acknowledge here the vulnerability involved in sharing these experiences. You know, that's a kind of also a disproportionate burden that migrants carry, that who has to speak about their pain and suffering publicly to educate. So first you have to experience it and then educate is also a position that many migrants are in, which if you're part of the mainstream or you belong to the dominant group, you have the privilege never to acknowledge that or never to have to think about it. And so in these responses, you are also noticing a great degree of authenticity based on the lived experiences of these people and their encounters in the United States. So there is the acknowledgement of, I think what the participants can hear is what we call bearing witness. You know, so in their experiences of feeling different, excluded, marginalized, belonging, they have created a story about themselves that they're sharing with you. And now you get to bear witness to those experiences. And I think it's important to acknowledge it takes courage and bravery as well to speak very deeply about the fact that you don't belong. You know, especially when you leave your shores and your homeland, you don't expect that you're going to a place where you're not going to belong. That's not the reason why you leave your homeland. So there is a double or triple burden in some ways, and I think you can hear in these voices, in these narratives, in these stories, and I just want to acknowledge the bravery, but also the vulnerability that's associated with the sharing then some of this experiences of being a migrant here. And this leads me to the next question. What kind of microaggressions have you experienced and how have you dealt with them?
So I'll go because now I know the order of things. So there's little things that, so microaggressions are always, well, I shouldn't say always, are most times ill-intentioned, right? I'm going to use that word because I feel sometimes it's said or a statement is made or you're compared to something and it's ill-intentioned. I've been in rooms before where it's almost like you have to give a disclaimer and say, Ornet, I don't want to offend you, but I'm going to tell a Black joke. And for me, it's sort of twofold because growing up in a Jamaican culture, a joke is a joke. So if you tell a joke and everybody's going to laugh because it's funny, there's no need to bring a disclaimer before you share the joke. So if you're in a room with people and they want to tell a Black joke, if there's a Black person there, then just don't tell the joke if you're going to have to put out a disclaimer, right? There's little things, again, like I mentioned earlier, you get stuff like, oh, your English is good. But it's not so much to question the body language that sometimes accompanies that. You ask yourself, is that a question or is it a statement? Because sometimes it's of shock. The body language is not sincerity, wanting to really know, like, why is your English so good, right? And that's the time that you want to educate. So you would ask the questions, like you ask how I dealt with something like that. You would ask the question, well, I'm from Jamaica. We do speak English. You know, have you been to Jamaica, or what do you know about Jamaica? Because we do have a dialect, but we are taught English. I mean, we are under the British monarchy, so our language is English. So sometimes I get offended, sometimes I don't, but it all depends on the body language that comes with a statement or a question like that. there's little things, but what I find is that ill-intentioned or not, and you can't, well, Winston Churchill says that if you, and this may not be in the right words, but you won't get to your destination if you have to stop and throw stones at every barking dog. And that just means that in my situation, I can't stop to educate everyone who's gonna have a misconception on something. But ill-intentioned or not, unaddressed microaggressions, I know can lead into something more than that. So when we do have the opportunity to address it, when I feel that it's worth addressing, I will try to do that and educate, right? Because sometimes it's the lack of knowing, the lack of awareness, and the habit of making assumptions as opposed to get into a habit of asking questions, dialoguing to get to understand and know more is what led to some of these microaggressions. But when you can, then you educate. But you have to realize you're not going to be able to do that for every single circumstances.
All right, thank you for that insight. Yeah, Shen?
Yeah, so I would say, well, my experience is pretty positive, but of course, for the many years, that there are always all kind of microaggression happening, you know, in the life and at work. I remember when I was trying to, when I was talking to my wife in Chinese, you know, in the grocery store, and we got attention, you know, they basically say, this is America, you know, you should supposed to speak English. If you want to speak Chinese, maybe you should go back to your own country, right? Those things, I believe that happen to a lot of Asian Americans, right? Well, other things I don't know, like you get treated differently at DMV, at a restaurant because of the accent, stuff like that. Actually, I just want to share something happened like 2 days ago. When I trying to inquire about a vacation property on Airbnb. So I just trying to ask how far that property is, you know, and the owner just replied to my message saying, you know, I don't want to rent my property to you. Okay, that's fine. But she put a reason there saying, okay, I'm not comfortable with the people that I cannot verify which part of the world it came from and whether you carry a virus. She never asked any question about that. She just assumed all those based upon my name, right? So, you know, those things happen from time to time. You know, it's frustrating. But how you manage that? I mean, for Asian Americans, I think it's very typical. we usually just let it go, right? In our culture and mindset, we always say, okay, put your head down, you know, do not draw attention, you know, do not complain. So most of the time we just deal those things in that way. So, but I feel, you know, with what I am currently experiencing, etc., I think we probably need to change in that. We need to stand up with it, you know, probably do something about it. Do not let it go. Let it be aware that's not right. That's not okay. So I'm thinking, should I reply a message? But I really don't want to get into it. Not saying that I made some assumption, and I'm still puzzling how am I going to deal with that the recent case. Yeah, but I will, like you mentioned, I probably want to learn to be more brave, and when I see this situation in the future, I will, you know, trying to say something or speak out loud, etc. Okay.
Right, thank you, Shen. Liam?
Yeah, and to add to Ornet's point, you know, growing up in the suburbs, I can't even explain the amount of times where people, you know, they tell jokes is what they call them, but once they continue to tell, you know, multiple jokes about the same, you know, same topic, you know, that being skin color, you start to wonder, hey, maybe they're not joke, maybe they don't consider them jokes, maybe, you know, they actually do have these prejudiced feelings towards that particular race, and that's why they're saying these jokes in the first place. So a lot of times when that happened, you know, I had to grow up and learn that I needed to distance myself away from those, you know, type of people who even said those jokes in the first place, because they don't become jokes anymore when you keep saying them over and over. And yeah, to add to Shen's point as well, you know, like I said before, I had the advantage of kind of blending in with other Americans. My name is pretty basic, Liam Sampson. I mean, it's a biblical name that can blend in, and you know, to that aspect, it also comes with a whole bunch of disadvantages as well, because you're still lumped up into this category, and people do assume that you have relation to your ancestors were enslaved or something of that nature. And I mean, while I do find this distinct aspect between Black Americans whose ancestors have been here for a while and South African Black Americans, it's kind of brought together with unfortunately just with racism in general, because we both experience the same things. And I do think there's there's microaggressions that come up just through like unconscious biases. As I was growing up, people assume I wasn't maybe properly educated, or I like a particular food, or one of my parents may not be there as well. And I don't think it's our job to really educate these people. I think they just need to learn these types of things themselves. And you just kind of got to have to be your own person in order to fight those stereotypes and push on despite these microaggressions that might try to hold you down.
Okay, right. Thank you. I mean, just to add a little bit to this conversation of microaggressions, it was Daryl Sue, a psychologist, who actually came to both the Coast Guard and the Connecticut College, who coined the term. He's written 2 books on it. I think it would be helpful to at least share a definition that he gives of what is a microaggression. He describes it as the everyday slights, indignities, put downs, and insults that people of color, women, LGBTQI populations, or those who are marginalized experience in their day-to-day interactions with people. And so there are structural exclusions, but these are everyday behavioral practices that then accumulate over time. So think of a 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 12-year-old, the same 12-year-old living with accumulated microaggressions. And they then occupy your mind. And that's where we talk about racism as a public health issue. Like many states are now ready to declare racism as a public health concern, because it has outcomes on body and cholesterol and stress and so on. So it's not enough to say whether it's intention or not intention. Part of it is the outcomes are very severe. And you have New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet and doctors who are looking at the correlationship between stress and racial factors or racial experiences, and microaggressions play a very big role in that. And that's why the need to, in some ways, talk about it. And you could hear in these, narratives, so it's not a kind of single factor at a particular time, but it happens in many periods of time. And also the fact that Shen has to figure out and think, should I respond or not? Or in the same way that Ornet said, that there are only so many battles that she's going to pick, and then she's going to have to choose strategically. And Liam talking about jokes, and those are all part of the microaggressions. I think we need to name it, and having the language really helps. Now we have a few other questions left before we open up our discussion to the participants. And this actually has more to do with recent events, and it's addressed to all, but I'm going to especially invite Shen to give us a little bit more elaboration on this. In the past few months, we have witnessed disturbing rise of hate crimes across the nation against Asian Americans and also other migrant groups. Can you speak to how this has personally impacted you, your family, and your community?
Yeah, thank you, Sunil, for asking this question. As you mentioned, Asian Americans have been increasingly targeted in both verbal and physical attacks starting from 2020, coinciding with the start of the coronavirus pandemic. So here I want to share, what I have experienced myself and what I'm observing in the Asian community. I think I can summarize that with 3 words. The first is anger, right? So the recent hate crimes have often targeted the elderly or especially vulnerable population, right? We have seen the graphic attack captured by video. It shows that elder Asian Americans were punched, were smashed to the ground and killed, right? So in March, a series of sparse shootings killed 8 people in Atlanta. 6 of them were Asian women. And people are devastating to see these brutal attacks on social media. And they get angry because they cannot resist thinking, what if those people are my parents, or my family? And the second one is frustration. So the Stop AAPI Hate website released a report recently. The number of anti-Asian hate incidents surged from 3,800 to 6,600 in March of this year alone. According to the New York City Police Department's data, the anti-Asian hate crime increased by 1,900% since the beginning of the pandemic. And hate crimes against Asian Americans in 16 cities rose by 150% in 2020. So those attacks have been going on and on, and it is increasing in volume. Okay, it is still reported daily. We expect it will get worse before it gets better. So not able to see the light in the tunnel and finding we have very limited we can do makes us very frustrated. And the third word is fear. The entire community is in a state of fear. And the impact is beyond those people who got physically attacked. Right? In San Francisco and New York City, many elders do not dare to go out for a walk, for grocery shopping, or even seeing doctors. Right? On the social media, I can see people are asking questions such as, should I carry a gun? Where can I learn self-defense? Or how to use pepper spray, etc. All these kind of questions, right? So when I told my friend that I also have fear, they were surprised. Because isn't this the area, the safest area, right? Indeed it is. However, I still get alert when strangers approach me. I worry every day about my family. My oldest son is a college student. So 3 years ago, when he was a freshman, he left the house. I was not that worried. But now I'm more worried. Even he's a junior now, right? I always worried that he could get attacked by a random person in the subway or on the street. Right? This kind of fear for life certainly causes distress and mental draining. And I just say this kind of thing is so un-American, right? That in 2021, we still need to worry about our safety because of our race. So yeah, these 3 words is something I experience myself, and I'm also seeing other people are suffering. I do want to get attention to everybody here and in the public. This is happening. It's happening to our fellow Americans. We are American. Asian Americans are American. We need your help. Thanks.
Thank you, Shen, for speaking so powerfully and in bringing attention to a really important, crucial issue. I'm just going to quickly ask our other two panelists if they want to comment or they have something they want to offer some words.
I would say that it's our job to be aware of these things and make sure that you know, ask your friends and make sure they're not going through any struggles, and just keep aware of this stuff because it's going on every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want to share too, just listening to Shen talks about that gave me goosebumps. I have Asian American friends. My son has Asian American friends. And yes, I am in fear because if he goes somewhere, I want to know where he's going, who he's with, what's happening, what not to do. Don't draw attention to yourself. So I too, what I just want to share, especially with just our audience, because these are the people that this conversation is reaching right now, is that you do the best you can. But when you know better, then do better. And I know this topic is not about diversity, but when we think about diversity, it's more than just race, color, ideas. It's part of standing up for something that you know isn't right. So regardless of your race, regardless of what you are, just because you're part of a community that is made up of immigrants who are Americans, who are just like you, working, doing the best they can, when you see something, say something. Or if you feel that the simple of right or wrong, because we're human beings, we should intervene. So with this happening, this is how we can help each other, right? We can continue to educate each other. We can continue to encourage each other to have love as opposed to hate. And it starts with us. This conversation is right here today, but just in our communities, if nothing that you can do, you heard him asking, we need your help. That resonates with me. And our community is made up of Asian, I talked about it earlier about the population of immigrants that's in the state. So again, when you know better, do better. That's all I want to share on that.
Yeah. No, thank you for those comments. Yes, and the only thing I would add to what was said before is that for many migrants have also Asian American have noted that they're not necessarily shocked by this as well. They have lived through a history of exclusion, through all the exclusionary laws that their ancestors had to go through from 1882 to 1917 to 1942 to 1960s and through. So there were always systematic laws that came to define what we call yellow peril or outsiders or forever foreigners, and the caricatures that have gone against Asian American communities. And interestingly, I think it's important to sort of put it out there that there are scholars who study Asian American, scholars of Asian American identity always speak about the fact that Asian Americans are neither white or neither black. And so they happen to be in this interesting binary. So as a culture, as a nation, we are used to understanding our racialized experiences through the lens of being black or white. But the idea of Asian Americanness, because there are certain myths associated with them being model minorities and highly educated and part of elite, what gets missed out is the highly racialized experiences of discrimination that they have to encounter and face. So this COVID epidemic has brought out what has always existed in some ways, but has not been made visible. And what you see now is that this group is also addressing histories of exclusion along with now what's an epidemic of fear. So it's a kind of confluence of two epidemics, the real epidemic of COVID with the epidemic of racism in the way it's manifesting in different minority groups right now. And I think we have to definitely address that in real and honest ways, that if one epidemic is the physical toll that it's taking, the other underlying one is also the mental toll. And it's manifesting very differently in different groups, depending on your resources, income, depending on your racial position, and so on. And with the Chinese American community and Asian American community, it's very distinct right now. The fear, the rage, the anger, very palpable. So that's I think why we need to hear Shen's plea of needing to frame it, or having a language to think about why this is happening. It can't just be out of the blue. One doesn't, when these incidents of exclusion happen, they don't come out of nowhere. There's always a history. And it's a reminder for us to understand what is that history. So the next question leads from there. How can we create solidarities across racial groups? I mean, if this panel is the beginning of that, is an attempt in some ways to create intercultural dialogue or communication about not just microaggressions, but also structures that create exclusion and discrimination, then how are we going to create solidarity across racial groups? Ornet, do you want to take that?
So that's a question that I'm not really sure where to start, but I mentioned before, I feel that one, we have to do it together. So it's not just, you know, this racial group, that racial group. We have to see ourselves as one, and we're made up. So this, I know this is not Jamaica, but our Jamaican motto, what we call it, says, out of many, we are one. And this just means that we are made up of so many different races, nationalities, but we're all one people. So under that umbrella, we're Americans, right? And so we've seen ourselves as Americans is a way forward to that solidarity, because we have to not necessarily stop seeing races, but stop putting identity and just that we're Americans. When we can say we're Americans, and we can start by not making assumptions about another racial group or something. We can start by asking questions, dialoguing, get to know the person. And I share this because not non-immigrants alone, I'm going to share an experience. And I was somewhere, and it's a place that I go to quite frequently to get food. I get lunch. And I was in the store at this one particular day, and there was a communication gap between myself and a server. And I wanted to order something different than what I normally get. And so here comes the communication problem, because I'm not getting what I normally get. And we were at a bypass because she's not understanding and I'm not understanding. And an elderly, one of the server, who is an elderly worker, she said something. And the only word I understood was Creole. But based on the context of the situation, I understand that she told me, because her eyes were looking at me, and she directed me to speak Creole. So basically that's what she was asking me to do. So the owner came over, and he overheard the situation, and he spoke to her in Creole, but I understood also. So I was trying to tell him that I'm not Haitian, I'm Jamaican. So as much as I would love to speak Creole, I don't know how to speak Creole. But the fact that she directed that to me, the customer, and not to the server to maybe learn English, it was just something that I feel that you asking this question now, it starts with us too, right? It starts with us in being more open, in being more accepting, and maybe not not so much stick to our own kind in every situation. And I know some of the times we do that because we feel safer, we feel wanted, we feel valued in our own communities with our own kind, right? But in order to get to that racial solidarity, it has to start with us too, as immigrants, as different races, because we have to see each other, not because I'm Black and I'm in Norwich in a Haitian, establishment. So I think we start there.
Thank you, Shen.
Yeah. First of all, yeah, thanks for Ornet and Liam, who show your support when I talk about anti-AD hate crime. So I think we already touched about this. To combat racism, it requires collective efforts and community solidarity. We have to find allies to stand with us, to help us, and not just in word, but also in action. So a few things I want to just simply touch about it, for our public. So first thing, be informed, right? So raise the story, share the story. What I found is like usually the public is not fully aware of, or completely unaware about the racism against the Asian Americans in history and even in the current event, right? So be informed. The second thing, I think, Sunil, you talked about education. I think that's a big piece of puzzle. There are no history of Asian Americans or immigrants in our textbook, right? So we need to get awareness of the public, to celebrate our own pride, celebrate our own accomplishment, that's another piece. But I think most importantly, I want to say is, probably Ornet also mentioned about it, it's break the bystander mentality, right? So when you say something not right, you need to stand up for each other. You need to intervene, right? And that should not be limited just to physical attack, but on any other forms of racism, right? So when you say even just casual racism, microaggression, take a stand. Just say that's not okay. Yeah. So I just want to simply say about this.
Yeah, Liam.
I would say the best way to tackle this is to add depth into our characters. We tend to create a bubble around ourselves. We go to work, we see the same people, we hang out with the same people, then we go home, and then we go on the same websites, which, like Facebook, for example, we're surrounded by like minds, and we tend to not try to explore out of that. So I encourage everyone to try to find different ways to introduce yourself to other cultures, whether that be through a hobby, like through sports, or artists, baking, anything. Like, just hobbies are a great way to find people of a multitude of different characters. And growing up playing soccer, I was able to meet a multiple different types of people from around the world who play similar sports to me, and I'm able to connect with that. So by getting out of that bubble, you could even like visit other countries. You're able to build different knowledge of other people's experiences, and by doing that, you create a more rounded personality, and you're able to understand. You're able to understand, people who may look different a little bit better.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the questions are over. I just want to add to the question of racial solidarity before we open it up to the participants and our guests, is that I think apart from the insights that are shared by the panelists, one important thing would be especially to name what is the problem very honestly. And something we haven't named is that we live in a country that's defined by white supremacy or by white power and so on. And it's like, I grew up in a country where casteism is dominant for 2000 years. There are individuals in my community whose job they've inherited is only to clean other people's excreta every morning with bare hands. They're called night soil workers. And that tradition practice still continues. Why? Because casteism is baked into a structure and it's hereditary, it's inherited, but it was defined and created by a certain dominant group. One can't attend to or change the structure unless you name it first. Very honestly, where does it come from? It doesn't mean there has been any progress or there are any laws, but laws alone are not enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't here be discussing the world after the post George Floyd moment. So naming honestly as well within what are the risks of solidarity? What is the risk of speaking? Do you all carry the same risks when you speak about race? When you carry a placard in the public square and say Black Lives Matter? Do you all? So racial solidarity means taking the same risk while speaking as well, if you want to bring, and words alone then have to then, as you've seen from the history of civil rights movement, that it has to be converted into policy. Without policy, we don't get to change school curriculum. We don't change our laws. So those are really equally important to kind of think about what's equal citizenship or equal liberty means in our constitution. That's what sort of the perfect union that Obama was talking about. So I think that naming in discomfort or living in discomfort is equally important. So our first reaction to sometimes naming about being a part of a dominant group is to kind of shy away or to deny or to feel ambivalent or to run away. But without acknowledging the feelings that come up when we even name what that oppression is or who the oppressor is or who the colonizer is, it's very easy to go back to your own groups and kind of continuing doing what we do. And so, we don't have enough time to do a sequel or to kind of go how to do that. There's a great amount of emotional work that takes place and political work to kind of have that conversation. But we're running out of time and we want to make sure that participants and guests who have assembled here today have enough time to talk and give comments. So I'm going to pause and thank each of my panelists for their sharing of their wisdom, their experiences, and making themselves vulnerable and helping us think through some really important issues. So how about, applause for them in any form that you feel you can give them.
This is a moment I wish we were in person because I think there would have been an astounding applause right there. So thank you, Sunil, for facilitating, and to our incredibly brave and amazing panel, Ornet, Shen, and Liam. Thank you for joining us today. I want to take a few minutes. We have just a few minutes to open this up to questions, comments, conversation. If you would like to speak, I think you can use the raised hand motion and I can call on you. If you have something that you'd like me to, a question, I'm happy to read that from the chat. I think I do have one question in the chat, and this would be directed to Ornet or Shen or even Sunil if you wanted to speak on this. What was the most difficult part of immigrating to the US? And conversely, what was the easiest part? Were you surprised by either of those experiences? Ornet, would you like to start again?
Take myself off mute every time. So the easiest part was I speak the language. So that was very easy to get around on buses, trains, and whatever means of transportation. The hardest part for me was not having any family close by. I did have an aunt that lives in New York, but I came in Rhode Island, and just a total different environment from weather-wise to the school population. Being homesick was the hardest part for me because you're used to coming home to a big family, whether you're coming from school or, and being in a country where you're just by yourself, really. So when you leave class and you go home or go to your apartment, it's you and your thoughts. So that was the hardest part for me, missing leaving my family at home and, just knowing that they're not right there within reach. So sometimes you want that hug because you've had a moment and it's just really no one there to give you that hug. So those were some tough days that I had to get through.
Mm-hmm.
I can just quickly share something, about the immigration process itself. It's never easy. It's very long, and I mentioned at the beginning a few different status change, but each status change is not trivial. You have to abide by the IRS rules and not the IRS, I'm sorry, the immigration office. They have very strict rules, so the margin of error is very thin. If you make a mistake, you are out of status. Basically, it means you cannot come to the United States anymore. And a lot of money, $10,000 application fee associated with it. And I remember when I applied for my green card, which is a permanent resident status, the documentation I applied for belonged to the category of outstanding researcher. It's more than 300 pages, okay? So it's never a trivial process. I just want to provide that to probably a lot of audience who never experienced that. And it was a very, very draining process, I would say.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think
I actually do have a question from a participant.
Yeah.
Kathy Parker, you have a question?
I do. And Shen, what you were speaking of, so I work with the Immigration Advocacy and Support Center, which is a nonprofit legal assistance group in New London, but we serve New London, Norwich residents who are low income, who are trying to make their way through that process. And it can be difficult for us to try to explain how hard it is and how meaningful it is to actually attain citizenship and attain status. And Shen, you talked about how that was one time when you actually first felt like you belonged, was saying the pledge during the ceremony. I was just wondering if each of you could just reflect, you've made that journey, did it, what was most meaningful to you? Was it the ability to travel? Was it being able to vote? What really impacted you?
I can just go very quickly first. And yeah, like I said, I came to the United States first. It's like to pursue my PhD degree. So I think I would be able to do better research in the United States. But then when I have children, then I decided to stay because I think that I can provide a better life for my children, so they don't need to go through what I have been through. That's why I become American citizen, and all other benefit, etc. That definitely I enjoyed the right to vote, etc. And then I'm able to participate in a lot of things before I become a citizen, which I'm not eligible. But I think it's my personal American dream, and also for the benefit of my family. That's why I went through that process, although not easy.
Do you want me to answer, Kathy, or?
I
Sure,
would
go
love
ahead.
to hear. Yeah, and I meant to. I started off with a question. I just meant to first thank all of you for sharing. I know how hard it is to sort of, try to consolidate all of these thoughts and all of your experiences for the benefit of everybody else. And I just really appreciate your sharing.
Very briefly, I could say to you that, I'm an educator, and I've been an educator for 25 years of my life. I've been teaching for 25 years, undergraduates. I write about this. So for me, I never actually ever step out of thinking of what it means to be a migrant. It informs my work, it informs my understanding about caste inequalities, racial inequalities. I never quite understood the depth of inequalities in my own home country until I came here as an outsider. I only understood the depth of casteism as such through racial inequalities. So for me, I see education and making people aware of their social locations and to mobilize people to create a better society, for a lack of a better word, is an important part of, I would say, my vocation here, which I would say I found as a teacher. And so that reflects in my community engagement, it reflects in my relationships, it reflects in what I write. And it's a place that is a source of a lot of struggle, but also a source of a lot of fulfillment.
Thank
So,
you, Sunil.
yep. Bruce?
Bruce, I see your hand up, but you are on mute. If you can unmute yourself to ask a question.
I got it, I think. Would the panelist or anyone who chooses to reflect on the motivations of the anti-immigrant voices prominent in our country today? Is it ignorance, fear, or perhaps something else?
Panelists?
So I just wanted to share that it's a bit of both, or it's a bit of everything that you just mentioned. A lot of it has to do with again, assumptions, or taking where you get your knowledge or your sources of information, as opposed to being open. And again, this is where the ignorance come in, because as opposed to finding an immigrant and sitting down and have a dialogue to share, to understand, it comes from, I'll just take this information. And sometimes it comes out of fear, right? Because if you are friends and peer pressure in the sense, because I know people who, because of their friends and the company they keep, although they would want to learn more, they almost learn more without having those friends in that company knowing that they have learned more. And it's the fear of, again, feeling that you don't belong into that group if you want to know more about immigration, or if you want to be friends with an immigrant. So it's fear, ignorance, lack of information, and again, lack of intellect, because there's just some people who just don't want to know or know how to know or how to understand. So there's a mixture of what is fueling all that.
Yeah, I think this, Sunil already talked about, for Asian Americans, it's a little bit different, because on color and appearance, oftentimes we are viewed as perpetual foreigners, right? So when people look at us as, not belonging here, so no matter how many generations you live here, people are still asking, where are you from, right? And when you are not a part of the social fabric, it is not surprising that people think it's okay to bully you, right? That's one thing. Another thing Sunil also mentioned in this, I think, the systemic discrimination, right? So United States was built on the basis of freedom and justice, but the racism also rooted very deeply in our social structure, I would say. And the recent anti-Asian hate is actually fits the historical pattern. Anytime when you have a social or economic crisis, then the immigrants usually becomes a scapegoat. And that's something I think probably the most fundamental problem about this anti-immigrant movement.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Immigrants make great scapegoats because they're so easily to be differentiated from the rest of the population. I mean, look at the problems going on recently with the coronavirus and it originating from, China. They throw the whole, Asian demographic into the same basket of, oh, well, that person looks Chinese, therefore they must have, came from the same country, which caused this problem initially. It's a way to kind of push, and it's also being abused by politicians as well, because it's very easy to build off people's dislike and prejudice, to use it to build power onto themselves as well. So I think it's very easily to manipulate hatred to use to a person's own advantage.
I think we're running out of time, but and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. The only thing I would add here is that I think with new immigrants, that we also have a very fundamentally new version of what America means, and that is deeply threatening to a lot of people. And with that comes shifts. A new America is hard to imagine because with that comes a shift in political power, financial power, cultural power. And if you're used to or brought up or socialized with the idea that you are at the center of power and you're entitled to it, then all of this would definitely feel very deeply threatening. And to sort of say what the panelists have said, rather than understanding other groups or how they came to be, it quickly turns into fear and rage, especially during times of economic crisis. That's all I'll say right now. But power is very central to understanding what is the current fragmentation in this moment. So I just want to pause here and thank everybody else. But Tony, floor over to you.
Tony, you're on mute.
The two old guys have trouble with mute. Tony now.
Still on mute.
There you go. I had to find myself first. So look, this was a very thought-provoking discussion. Thanks to Ornet, Liam, and Shen, and of course Sunil for moderating the discussion. As most of you probably know, I'm an immigrant myself, but I came so long ago, it seems like I've been here forever. I came over when I was 19 and identify with a lot of the thoughts and concerns and fears that you've all had, you've all expressed here in many ways. The biggest issue that I had was missing out on all those family, I think Ornet mentioned this, and all those family, the weddings, the births, the funerals, I mean, all of those family traditions that, when you come here, that's part of it. You miss out on that. There's no other way about it. When I came here, it cost $20 to make a phone call, which you could hardly hear, for 3 minutes. And I'd have to write my mother in advance and have her show up at the local telephone box to be there when I would call. Obviously, WhatsApp and all the other apps that's out there has changed all of that, which has made life somewhat easier, but nevertheless, very difficult. Look, we're all enriched by immigrants, regardless of what country you come from. Our culture, or everything about who we are as Americans wouldn't be as it is. Do we have our warts? We sure do. And we saw all of that this past year in more ways than we care to really admit. My big question, Sunil, and for all of you, let's not end the discussion now. Where do we go from here? Because as I think, again, it might have been Ornet or Shen, Shen, I think, when you hear people expressing negative thoughts about immigrants or for non-immigrants, Black people, speak up. It's time to recognize that silence is acceptance. Speak up, be polite, but speak up. Because we don't do that, we're going to have this discussion forever. So we really have an opportunity here. The door has been opened. So we have an opportunity here to take a thoughtful approach to bringing our wonderful cultures together under the American flag. Look, I think we're done. Again, thank you to our panelists and for all of you who have joined us. And have a great evening, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Sunil.
Safe.
Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.